Hi, everyone. I'm Vladimir Gite. Thanks so much for joining us. Welcome to CBSN Originals. This is our in-depth, long-form reporting on the major stories impacting the nation and the world. Tonight, we're taking a look at the impact of the legalization of marijuana in America. For the third election in a row, pot will be on the ballot. This time, more states than ever will be voting on whether to legalize its recreational use. Arizona, California, Maine, Massachusetts, and Nevada all hold the future of legal weed in their hand. Tony DeCopo reports.
It's time to free the weed.
Colorado, the first state making marijuana legal.
This is big money.
A major investment firm will put its money behind marijuana.
Voters in Oregon, Alaska, and Washington, D.C. legalize recreational marijuana.
And didn't inhale?
I inhale frequently.
Puff, puff, puffs.
There will be big pot. It's inevitable.
You've seen the voters speak.
It feels like freedom.
Legalization is happening, for the first and only time, and so we have an opportunity to get it right the first time. And it seems like instead we're just going to do alcohol again. We're just going to do tobacco again, and we're just going to create this big commercial model, and it's disappointing.
You have been part of a movement that is historic, and you weren't only witness to it, you participated in it.
Yeah.
And now you're telling me you're worried about the direction of it.
I believe the majority of Americans think it should be legal. People are seeing these states legalize, and the states are still functioning. I mean, they're not only functioning, but they're making billions of dollars in additional tax revenue.
Is there a federal committee of any kind, anything formal or official on the national level studying marijuana legalization?
There haven't been formal hearings before Congress, which I think is really silly.
To be clear, the most formal work that the federal government has done on marijuana legalization has been a white paper by yourself and Congressman Polis.
Yeah.
It seems crazy. It's almost, the industry is almost bigger than the NFL at this point.
It's not been something that politicians have felt comfortable moving forward with. Hence, it has been driven at the state level.
We're lurching from prohibition to the most wide open kind of legalization. Probably a bad idea.
The experts are thinking about, and I think the public is beginning to think about, well, okay, so it's going to be legal, but how should it be illegal? What should that look like? What kind of products are going to be on the shelf? Who's going to be selling it? How are they going to be selling it? Who are they going to be selling it to? And those are the type of questions that we need to start thinking about now, not after we've already, passed the law and created the industry.
The concern is that what's being sold now is enormously more potent than what was being sold back when, that it's being marketed very aggressively. And everybody I know my age that still smokes complains that you can't get the mellow stuff we used to get.
Looking into the future, you say it's unclear whether marijuana will become a bigger, more commercial market. Can you see how that uncertainty might be frightening to people?
The marijuana market is not going to grow. It's just going to become more legitimate. The same amount of marijuana is going to be produced and sold whether it's legal or not.
You think there's going to be no increase in marijuana use under legalization?
It's a fact that there will be billions upon billions of dollars of marijuana produced and sold in this country, whether it's legal or not.
People who are opposed to legalization, the line that you hear most often is it's going to be a commercial takeover. There's going to be big pot, just like big tobacco, just like big alcohol.
I think it's a reasonable concern, but they're ignoring the fact that we have big pot right now. Massive drug cartels that are making billions of dollars. They're not checking for product quality. They're not checking IDs about people who buy it. We have big marijuana now.
What's the problem with giving marijuana businesses the right to make money?
I think if you're selling batteries or if you're selling toothpaste or if you're selling tomatoes, you're absolutely right. Let's find the most efficient and most effective way to do it. But we're not talking about selling batteries or toothpaste. We're talking about selling drugs.
We know that America is capable of making this into just a really toxic thing, where it's only, again, feeding certain people at the end of the day, and it's just taking money out of the rest of the community.
Big pot is a very scary thing.
The people over there are putting labels on packages and it goes to shipping and then it goes to someone's door?
That's exactly right.
So this is like an Amazon warehouse for marijuana.
That's right. Our focus is on building mainstream global brands that help transition the cannabis industry from an illicit market to a fully legal, transparent market around the world. Marley Natural is a recreational brand focused on the life and legacy of Bob Marley. Leafly provides information on cannabis strains and locations that sell cannabis around the world. Tilray is a medical cannabis company, primarily operating in Canada, although exporting products to other countries around the world.
Is there a trade-off in this business between profit and public health?
I don't know. I don't think there is a trade-off. I think that the legalization of cannabis, the end of prohibition, will actually improve public health because people will be consuming a tested, regulated product.
Right now, according to federal data, about 4 million people self-report a cannabis dependency or use disorder. That's a pretty big number. Does it concern you?
Does a certain level of addiction in this industry on this particular product concern me? Of course it does. It concerns me as an entrepreneur, it concerns me as a CEO, it concerns me as a father.
But they're your most profitable customers. So your concern is in direct contradiction to your need to make a profit. How do you balance those two?
People who already consume this product are going to benefit from the legalization of the product. They're going to have a safer product, they're going to have a well-regulated product.
And trust me, I, Brendan Kennedy, will help self-regulate this industry.
I would trust the politicians and bureaucrats around the world.
Who does that? No one trusts the politicians and bureaucrats. You're going to be a captain of this young industry.
Yes.
You already are.
Yeah,
and you're saying trust me, essentially, to the voters who will pull the lever for legalization.
No one's ever gone through the end of prohibition in the last 7 years, so I don't know how else to say trust me other than trust me.
People who sell potentially addictive products are financially dependent on the people who become chemically dependent. So that industry is going to do everything it can to promote heavy use and to promote public policies that encourage heavy use.
The marketing here, I'm looking at blue sky, a desert. It looks like it could be an outdoors company. What are you going for?
We're going for sort of it's a natural product. It's found in nature.
You know, I can imagine someone saying, brave figure silhouetted against the setting sun somewhere in the west. It reminds me of the Marlboro Man.
You could say that about anyone hiking in nature. You could say about the guy
But this
on
is
the
somebody
Cliff
hiking.
Bar.
But this is someone hiking in nature on a smokable, natural plant product. In the snack food industry, in the fast food industry, there are scientists in white coats trying to devise the most flavorful chip and the most irresistible French fry. Can you imagine that kind of focused scientific innovation in the recreational marijuana world?
I don't think you have to imagine it. I think that's happening now.
This is something that needs to be respected. So it's going to be medicine, but it's also a controlled substance. So let's take care of it and be, kind of steward it as it comes to light.
I want to give you one final, and this is the last question,
Okay.
this opportunity to drive a stake through the heart of the primary criticism of legalization, which is guys like you are going to get rich and public health is going to suffer. What is the strongest response you have to that?
We've been at the forefront of this industry for the last 6 years. We will lead from the front. We'll take criticism. We will regulate ourselves. No one wants the Budweiserification of the industry. No one wants the joke cannibalization in the industry.
Given the direction of the marijuana market, do you think the future holds marijuana commercials in the Super Bowl, blimps with marijuana leaves on the side of them, mass advertising exactly like we have in alcohol?
Almost certainly. I expect to see a whole new version of Bud versus Bud Light, and it won't be good.
Alcohol is treated differently in every state. We can do this with marijuana, and I'm perfectly comfortable with having the evolution of this issue so that people can control this state by state, find out what works, what they want, where they want it.
There needs to be an organization somewhere in the middle that says, the status quo isn't working. Think about a state monopoly. When you have a state monopoly, you have a little bit more tools at your disposal to kind of, again, meet demand but not exceed demand or drive up demand. You can control when marijuana is sold, how it's sold, who it's sold to, those sorts of things.
Do you think that commercial marijuana, for-profit marijuana, is the safest possible way to end prohibition?
I don't know what the alternative is. What are you suggesting is the alternative? I mean, I'm not saying it's the safest way, I'm saying it's the only way.
I'm not pretending that I know what's going to happen 100 or 50 or even 25 years
But isn't
from
that
now.
scary? You're asking people to jump and we
What's
don't know
scary is that we are destroying lives. What's scary is we can't protect children now. What's scary is that we are subsidizing Mexican drug cartels. Those things ought to scare people. That African American young men are 4 times more likely to be arrested or hassled for something that most Americans now think should be legal. Now those are things that are scary now. Those are things that are wrong now. And I'll be happy to work with you state by state, allow the states to experiment, and then let's watch it like a hawk. And if there are things that develop, let's have the courage to change it.
I don't think they're at the point where there's an established big pot yet. I think there will be like a fine restaurant, and then there'll be a Burger King, and then there will be a McDonald's of marijuana.
A McDonald's of marijuana. Here to dig deeper on this issue is Steve Fox, co-founder of the National Cannabis Industry Association and attorney at Vicente Cederberg LLC. Vivian Azer, managing director of beverages, tobacco, and cannabis at Cowan & Company, and the correspondent from The Piece, CBS News' Tony DeCopo. Good to have you guys. Thank you for stopping by. All right, let me start by getting each of your reactions to the piece. Steve, let's start with you.
Well, I guess my general reaction is it seemed to be slanted a bit in the sense that it made it seem like marijuana is a terribly dangerous product that we need to be very careful with. I mean, it is a consumer product. It's a social intoxicant, but it must be remembered that it is less harmful, less toxic, less addictive, and less likely to cause violence than alcohol. So what we have here is a substance that is like alcohol, but far less harmful. If the alcohol industry said that they had created a new product that was less toxic, less harmful, less likely to lead to domestic violence and other forms of violence, we'd be happy and we'd say, great, there's a better alcohol. And that's what we have here, and a commercial market is developing around it.
Steve, that's a great point. I want to dig into that in a moment. I want to get Vivian's reaction to the piece.
So, as a Wall Street analyst, I think about category sizing. And, with the category today at close to $6 billion, you guys had 5.4. That's almost 2x the size of the e-cigarette category. And that really doesn't capture a very large informal market. We currently peg the category at about $30 billion. And so what the piece rings true, and that statistic rings true, is that this is already a very large market. There's a lot of consumer demand out there, and that demand is being met.
It can get bigger, right? And the goal, I guess, if you're an analyst, is that it will, or not the goal, but the hope is that it will grow.
Well, I think, in a responsible way, we assume that with federal deregulation that the category can get to $50 billion by 2026. So that's really robust when you think about a 20% plus compound annual growth rate off of where we are today. But given that we think that the informal market is about 25 billion, it's not that much growth. And there is this waterfall effect. If you look at incidence, so the percent of a cohort or population, 18 and 25, that's already reporting to the U.S. government that they're using cannabis, it's over 30%.
Wow.
So the category is going to grow regardless.
Tony, first of all, great reporting. Really, really interesting stuff here. Let me get your reaction to what Steve said, and again to what we are sort of looking at, which is the analytics from a Wall Street perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think the important thing to take away from the documentary is that we're at a turning point for marijuana. Up until now, it's been a social movement. It's been about criminal justice reform. It's been about ending the drug war. And now we're pivoting, and the movement is falling away, and the accountants are taking over. The activists go one way, the accountants come in. It's becoming more of a business. So in the states that are looking to legalize this fall, they are primarily driven by large donors who have a financial stake in that legalization passing. And now in the states that have had legalization, and that's why you've been doing work on this, you have people taking money from investors who now have a very, very strong interest in driving up demand for a product that is, Steve can call it a social intoxicant. It is an intoxicant. It can be safer than alcohol, but it doesn't mean it's safe. And so what public health officials and even some fans of legalization, important to point out, everybody in the documentary is against what we currently have. They're just a little bit wary about the full-scale commercialization. That is the question. As we go from what we have to what we will have, how do we keep it from becoming a problem like alcohol has become for many people in this country?
And that's something we're going to be digging into. Steve, Vivian, and Tony, stay right here. We're going to continue this conversation after a quick break. You're watching CBSN.
People who sell potentially addictive products are financially dependent on the people who become chemically dependent. So that industry is going to do everything it can to promote heavy use and to promote public policies that encourage heavy use.
Welcome back again to CBSN Originals. Tonight we've been discussing the impact of the commercialization of legal marijuana. Let's go back to our panel. So Steve, let's start with you. We heard from the professor from the piece they're talking about the people who sell potentially addictive products being financially dependent on people being chemically dependent on that product. Isn't that the biggest fear with the corporate takeover of weed?
Well, I mean, again, it's true of basically any industry in the United States. I mean, I've been working on this for a long time. I started out as the advocate that was suggested was working on this before the industry. I was working on this when the DEA was going after medical marijuana patients in California. And also, back in that time, we had Purdue Pharmaceutical paying for anti-marijuana ads while they were selling OxyContin. And there are other drugs, OxyContin and other drugs that are out there that are being sold. There's certainly a concern, and we want to make sure that marijuana is regulated in a proper fashion, of course, but you really need to take the harm of the substance into account. And it's been studied for decades and used for decades, and the harms are relatively minimal. Of course, people should not drive, operate heavy equipment, and so on, but the harms of the substance are very limited.
Vivian, what do you think of these federal regulations that are imminent after this election?
Oh gosh, I don't know if it's imminent. I would leave that up to the lawyers and the regulators, but we certainly think that if we saw some pretty good momentum, and the ballots would indicate that certainly California is leaning towards favorability across Arizona, Nevada, Maine, and Massachusetts. The polling has been a little bit mixed, but it's generally tended close to 50% in favor. So that's the kind of momentum you would need to get to federal deregulation for sure.
I think the momentum is very clearly in favor of legalization. Huge majorities at this point favor adult use. The question now becomes, okay, we're fine with people having it, but how should they be provided it? Who should sell it? How should it be marketed? That's really the question. And when people go to the voting booth and make a decision on that point, they should be looking at the fine print and making a prediction for themselves about the direction of this. Steve seems very comfortable with the alcohol industry as a model. There are a lot of people in the public health community, a lot of professors, a lot of academics, who look at the alcohol regulatory system and say to themselves, that ain't good. A lot of trouble there. Give you a couple quick examples. Since the end of alcohol prohibition, the percentage of people who've told pollsters from Gallup that they have a serious problem in their family with alcohol, it's doubled. It's gone from 15% to 33%. The price of alcohol is the same today, actually less than it was after the Korean War. That's because the alcohol industry is very powerful and is able to keep prices very low. Taxes don't go up on alcohol. So if we are going to create a new industry like the alcohol industry, I wonder if lobbyists for marijuana are concerned that there could be some takeover here from the moneyed interest, and that the people who have been huge fans of marijuana, Steve is right, for centuries, for millennia, are going to be a little bit surprised by the branding and the marketing and the push that is going to be very different from the drum circle activism that my parents and a lot of people I know have been involved in the past.
Steve, your reaction?
Yeah, I mean, I worked on the Colorado campaign, have been active in the state for more than a decade, and I know that people who are marijuana consumers there are pretty happy that they don't have to go to some shady house to buy their marijuana, and that they can go into a nice, clean store and buy a tested, properly packaged product and enjoy it at home. So I don't see the problem there.
Is there a danger, guys, in the fact that we saw this with the tobacco industry, that because now you have the commercialization of this drug, that all of a sudden we start to see higher levels of THC? And I'm not a chemist, but I'm just curious if that's something that people are worried about, something that we've already perhaps even seen. In other words, the strength and the potency of THC. So, Steve, as you point out, that pot hasn't, a lot of people say pot doesn't hurt anybody. It's not nearly as addictive as some of the other things that Americans are addicted to. But could we see a spiking of marijuana, which could lead to potential problems down the line?
Well, if that's a question for me, I would say we're seeing in Colorado and other states that the levels of THC are higher than they've been in the past. But people
than they've ever been anywhere.
Sure,
yeah.
Sure. No, that's absolutely true. But THC is THC. And if people want to consume less, they can consume less. And if they want to consume more, they can consume more. I mean, you should acknowledge, of course, that people now can get the same intoxicant or intoxication level by smoking less and taking less into their lungs, putting aside the fact that
people can get the same satisfaction, arguably, from a bag of chips by having just one, but the Lay's marketing model is built on having two.
Just have
yeah,
one.
I tend to eat the bowl. I tend to eat the bowl.
Right.
Yeah.
But one thing to remember is that this regulation is not static, right? Colorado started off with a certain equivalency measure, and as they kind of saw the market evolve, they took that down, right?
Yeah.
In terms of what concentrate equates to raw flour, right? So it's really all about just informing the consumer about how much they should be dosing.
But I don't. But Tony, to that point, I mean, if it's more potent and it's more powerful, if you know, and I'm not somebody who uses, but if you roll a joint or you pack a bowl and you or smoke the entire thing, but it's much more powerful, you're not going to just take a toke and that's it, right? You're going to smoke the entire bowl, and that's going to be more detrimental to your health.
Remains to be seen. People who are going to the ballot box on this issue this year should ask themselves what makes more sense to them. That people are going to have less or have the normal amount and just get higher, or are people going to replace their evening drink with cannabis? Some people will, but I think probably it's going to be a layering drug. It's going to be something you do in addition to.
Well, there is actual NSDUH data that looks at both complementary use as well as substitution. And you're right, you are seeing a little bit higher of a coincidence between alcohol and cannabis. But amongst cannabis users that report adding alcohol to that occasion, that's falling fairly steadily.
Alcohol use in Colorado actually went up. I mean, there's no good conclusive data on this at all. So we can toss around contradictory pieces of information. I think it'll serve no one because it's not settled.
It's really, Steve, I want to ask a question about, because you're a lawyer, and I'm curious just in terms of the criminal justice system, how this will play into that. Many people that go to jail or that are arrested for pot-related activities, and I don't mean people who are pushing it or who are selling massive quantities of it. I mean people who are just using it. What kind of future are we looking at? And I'm sure it's probably too early to tell in the states that have legalized it, but what effect that's having on the criminal justice system?
Oh, well, it's definitely led to a dramatic drop in arrests for marijuana, not surprisingly. And that is the most important factor here, and something that always gets missed is that, there have been, an average of 700,000 arrests in the United States for marijuana every year, with 90% of those being for possession. And these arrests, destroy lives, and it needs to end, and it's great that that's starting to come down. I mean, all of this conversation about how we regulate and how we sell is a healthy conversation, and we should have it, and we hope that the federal government actually enters the conversation at some point. But the point is the arrests are going down, that's great, and let's figure out how to regulate.
Hey, Steve, I'd love to get your reaction to some of the parallel industries to marijuana. We have food, we have the alcohol industry, we have the tobacco industry. The alcohol industry makes most of its money off people who have 10 or more drinks per day. I think the conventional term is alcoholic.
That's an alcoholic.
That's an alcoholic, right? That's not anyone doing
a day, 10 or more
per
drinks
day.
a day.
Per day,
Wow.
yeah.
Okay.
That is the biggest money-making person for the alcohol industry. Same kind of thing for the cigarette industry. Same kind of thing for Coca-Cola, for that matter. And the food industry re-engineered its product, gotten really good at selling it. We now have 20 more pounds of oil and fat in our diet than we did in 1950, 30 more pounds of sugar than we used to have. We're different people, and that's because companies have become exceedingly good at making a product that we literally cannot resist, and then cornering us with that product.
That's the fear, right?
So you have these parallels, and Steve, I'd love to know, from your perspective, what gives you comfort that marijuana, a thing that you love and have appreciated for a long time, and a lot of people have, what gives you comfort that that same situation is not going to develop with cannabis?
Well, I mean, there's obviously a long history of use, and
there's a long history of use of cheese too, but we're now eating 20 pounds more of it than we used to, and that's a problem for people.
Yeah, well, perhaps that's the case, and we should eat less cheese. But in terms of marijuana, we just haven't seen the long-term effects. But getting to your point, I do want to address it, is that there could be processes or technology and so on that might modify the plant in some way. I'm not sure what that would be. It might be like whatever is used in e-cigarettes or vape pens and so on, that you would want to make sure that everything is safe. But that's what regulation is about. I mean, I guess I'm just comforted by the fact that it has been used for a long time. It's far less harmful than alcohol. It's hard for me to imagine how it would suddenly become a far more dangerous product after 1,000 or many thousands of years. But again, like it would have to do with changes in the plant or changes changes the way it's produced, and that's why we should regulate. I'm totally on board.
But that's sort of, I think, the central question, and I think a lot of people in this country are going to wonder about that. To Tony's point, when you allow something that can be chemically manipulated, and it ranges. I mean, you use the example of Lay's potato chips or other foods that now we're just eating a whole lot more of them. People drink gallons and gallons and gallons of soda, and that's great for Coca-Cola, and I'm not looking to impugn that particular brand, but for people who make soda, the question becomes obviously when this stuff is available and people see a profit motive, and maybe Vivian, you can answer a little bit of this as well. When people see a profit motive, does that all of a sudden mean that people are at risk? Something that has been enjoyed by people for thousands of years now becomes something that is dangerous.
Well, I mean, look, I'm not a doctor, but anecdotally, it would seem that there's a certain subset of the population that has a propensity towards addiction. And while your point is well taken on the concentration of alcohol volumes amongst a small subset of consumers, I think it is important to remember that 70% of adults in the United States do enjoy alcohol on an annual basis, right? So there is a large addressable market that does enjoy the product responsibly, and I don't know that it's necessarily fair to demonize the product itself because of the behaviors of a certain subset of consumers.
Right. So I guess I understand. You're essentially saying, look, there's a lot of people who drink alcohol and they enjoy it the way it's meant to be enjoyed, which is you have a glass of wine while you're watching Scandal. But I'm curious though, still, that there could be. I think for people, we may not even know what the health risks are if it's something that people are able to do on a regular basis. And what does that mean for medical insurance, for example? How are they going to address this now, this other addiction that people are going to be able to legally buy or purchase?
Steve, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to offer, the CDC went into Colorado. They looked at what was happening with teenagers post-legalization. They did not see a divergence in trend relative to what was happening on a national basis. And if you look between 2011 and 2015, amongst 12 to 17-year-olds, incidence fell 11%. The growth in the cannabis market is almost exclusively concentrated in legal age consumers. The proportion of consumers 26 and above that report smoking cannabis was up over 30% over that 4-year time frame. You've seen double-digit declines in addiction, in teen addiction, and teen dependence.
Interesting. Tony?
One concerning trend line in marijuana use is the lower and lower age of first contact. So when a person smokes something in high school now, it's typically a joint, not a cigarette. That's a major shift. And the earlier a person starts with marijuana, the public health experts tell us, the more likely they are to be captured by it, become an addict, become dependent on it. So that's troubling.
Although, again, it sort of goes back to what Steve was saying. If that's the case, would you want your kid to have a spleef as opposed to a cigarette, which we know how dangerous cigarettes are?
For sure. To answer Steve's invitation to who's the boogeyman here, well, tobacco is the case study of a relatively benign substance being created into something new, reinvented. In the 19th century, medical schools never saw lung cancer. There'd be the occasional case, and all the students would be brought around the table to be like, you'll never see this again, but here's a guy with lung cancer.
Right.
And then cigarette machines and automatic rolling machines and mass media and a re-engineered tobacco leaf that you could pull deeper into your lungs came on the market. And then by 1950, people woke up and they were like, oh my God, this is terrible. This is nothing like
Except for those doctors who used to advertise on television, before I perform an operation.
There will be those doctors for this.
I mean, a smooth pull.
It's remarkable the extent to which the messaging around marijuana is identical to the messaging historically around alcohol, to the point where during alcohol prohibition, you could actually get a medical prescription for whiskey. Oh, is your stomach upset? Right. Have some whiskey.
Right. That's interesting. Yeah. It's a fascinating discussion. We're going to have to leave it there. First of all, Tony, incredible reporting. Thank you so much for contributing to this. Is the first CBSN original you've done.
Yeah.
Well done, my friend. Thanks to Steve Fox in Washington and Vivian Azer, and of course, Tony DeCopel. We appreciate it.